And what if the real error is not in your body, but in how you were taught to understand it? For years we have been made to believe that health depends only on medications and diagnoses. But what no one tells you is that there is another way to heal. One that does not start with a medical prescription, but with what you think, feel, and decide every day. And although few dare to talk about this, today you are going to discover it. For years I thought that healing was an exclusive matter of doctors, diagnoses, and endless treatments. But there was a very deep and silent moment in which I understood something that changed everything. My mind was participating in my illness, and not from the symbolic, but from the physical. Every thought I repeated, every emotion I fed without realizing it, sent direct signals to my cells. My body did not distinguish whether the pain was real or if I recreated it over and over again with my fear, my anguish, my history. I was not aware of it, but I was trapped in a prison that I myself reinforced every day. And the strongest thing was realizing that I didn't need more medicine. I needed another way of thinking about myself, of living within myself. It was not about rejecting science or treatments, but about assuming that there was an essential part of the process that I was ignoring. My emotional participation in what happened to me, what I thought when I woke up, how I talked about myself, the type of energy I held during the day. All of that was creating a chemistry that my body obeyed like an order. My immune system responded not only to viruses or bacteria, but also to my beliefs, to my internal dialogue, to the way I related to my history. Sometimes we believe that our biology is condemned by genetics or age, but that's not how it is. What I discovered was that the body can always change whenever you give it new instructions. And those instructions don't come from outside, they come from you. Because if a negative thought has the power to make you sick, a conscious one can also begin to heal you. That was the first door that opened, to stop being the same mind that had sustained so much discomfort. Changing that internal script was not easy. It involved letting go of victimization, attachment to my history, and above all, the habit of repeating the same thing every day as if I had no choice. Do you know what happens when you spend years thinking the same, feeling the same, and reacting the same? Your body takes it as an absolute truth. You are no longer living a new day, you are repeating the same one from yesterday with a different calendar. That's why, if you really want to heal, you need to make a cut, a before and after, to break that pattern, to choose something different, even if it's small, to change the first thought of the morning, to hold a different emotion, to breathe with intention. They are simple, but transformative gestures. And the most magical thing is that the body recognizes them. It knows when you are giving it a new direction, a new energy. I lived it firsthand. The day I stopped saying, I am this way, and started asking myself, who do I want to start being today? My body felt it, and it wasn't immediate or spectacular. It was progressive, honest, real. It began in the way I talked to myself, in how I breathed in the face of a difficult emotion, in how I looked at myself in the mirror, and little by little my health began to reflect that new state, because the body always listens. And when you change your mind, it changes with you. One of the most revolutionary things I understood was that thought is not just a function of the mind, but a tool of power. And I don't say it from an empty positive speech, but from the experience of someone who lived many years trapped in destructive beliefs. I discovered that thoughts, when repeated, become orders for the body. And if those orders are loaded with fear, with judgment, with guilt, the body responds by getting sick, by shutting down, by defending itself as best it can. That's why the first step is not to force yourself to think nicely, but to honestly observe what kind of thoughts you are feeding, what stories you are telling yourself, where they come from, do they still serve you? It's not about fighting your mind, but about guiding it like a mother who holds, because the wounded mind doesn't need more pressure, it needs understanding. And from there, With practice and patience, it's possible to re-educate it. How would you do it with a part of you that only learned to survive? I started with simple phrases, not because I believed in them at first, but because my body needed something different from what it had been receiving. Sometimes it was as simple as saying, "I am safe," even though a part of me didn't believe it. But by repeating it, by accompanying it with breathing, with presence, with tenderness, something began to move, and that something was enough to continue. Because change doesn't happen all at once, it happens when you insist on taking care of yourself, even when you don't know how. Thought is not magic. It is practice. It is commitment to yourself. It is a daily medicine that the body recognizes, that the brain reconfigures, that your history begins to write with new strokes, and the best thing is that you don't need anyone else to start, you only need yourself. For a long time I believed that healing was an external task, that someone else had to give me the answer, that a medication or a technique was the key to feeling good again. But over time I discovered something that changed everything. True healing doesn't come from the outside, it is born from within. And many times the only thing that prevents that process is the deep fear we have of feeling, because we have been taught to numb ourselves, to run, to cover up everything that hurts. But what is not felt is not released, and what is not released becomes stagnant. I clearly remember the moment I stopped avoiding my discomfort, not because I felt brave, but because I couldn't do it anymore. And there, in the midst of that emotional exhaustion, a truth appeared that stirred me inside. A large part of my suffering did not come from the pain itself, but from my resistance to it. I had been fighting against my emotions as if they were enemies, as if feeling vulnerable were a mistake. But that fight was what wore me out. It wasn't the pain, it was the judgment I put on top of it. That's when I understood that the body screams when the soul has been silenced for too long, that illnesses are often nothing more than messages that we haven't allowed ourselves to hear. So I stopped asking myself, why is this happening to me? And I began to ask, why is this appearing in my life? That question took me in a completely different direction. It pulled me out of the victim role and returned me to the center of my power. Because as long as you keep believing that what you feel is a punishment, you will never be able to transform it. Healing involves going through it. There are no shortcuts, there are no magic formulas, but there is something you can do. Stop escaping. Stop turning off your emotions as if they were fires, and start looking at them as signals, because every emotion that appears, even the most uncomfortable one, has a purpose. And if you manage to hold it with presence, without wanting to change it immediately, without wanting to repress it or disguise it, then that emotion begins to speak to you. And what it says is often exactly what you needed to hear to start changing your story. That's why the real method that transforms is not illegal, because it's forbidden, but because it goes against everything we have been told, because we have been taught to fear pain, when in reality it is pain that invites us to wake up. And waking up, even if it hurts, is always the beginning of a new life. For years I believed that healing meant getting better in the eyes of others, that if I no longer showed symptoms, then I was cured. But real healing doesn't always look pretty, nor is it immediate, nor does it follow a perfect script. Sometimes it hurts, it confuses, and it confronts you with parts of yourself that you never wanted to look at. And that is part of the process. Because healing is not about eliminating pain, it is about giving it a place, it is about integrating it so that it no longer has to scream. And the curious thing is that when you stop fighting with what you feel, the body also begins to respond. Not because you have found a miraculous solution, but because you are stopping resisting. The body listens to your thoughts, what you repeat every day, what you believe about yourself, about life, about your worth, that is deeply recorded. And when your thoughts are constant attacks on yourself, the body defends itself. But when you learn to speak to yourself with tenderness, with respect, with understanding, something inside you calms down. You don't need to be positive all the time. You also don't need to pretend that everything is fine. You just need honesty, to listen to yourself, to recognize what is there without disguising it, and from there, little by little, begin to choose thoughts that don't destroy you, that sustain you, that accompany you, because that is the basis of a healthy mind, not to avoid the negative, but to learn not to amplify it. Remember this, your body is not against you, it never has been. It has only been showing you what your mind is silencing. So if you really want to start healing, the first step is to stop demanding perfection and start cultivating compassion. When I started to observe my thoughts, I couldn't believe how many times a day I talked to myself badly without realizing it. I would say things like, "I'm not good at this, it's sure to hurt more, I won't be able to handle this," and I said all that as if it were true. No one demanded it of me, no one imposed it on me, but there I was, convincing myself that I couldn't heal, that my body didn't have that capacity. And the saddest thing was that I didn't do it out of malice, but out of habit, because that's how I had been taught to think, from fear, from judgment, from the separation from my own power. It was then that I understood that a large part of our illness originates in how we interpret what happens to us. If you see your body as an enemy, if you treat it as a problem, if every symptom is a punishment, it is logical that you live at war with yourself. But if you stop to look with compassion, if you recognize that your body has done everything it can to keep you alive, then you begin to understand that healing is not just about eliminating pain, but about reuniting with the part of you that you had abandoned. And I'm not talking about forced positivism, I'm talking about realizing what you're telling yourself every day. Because if you live repeating that you are sick, that you are broken, that there is no way out, you are reinforcing an identity that your body will sooner or later assume as its own. The body doesn't know how to lie, but it does know how to obey. If you talk to it with fear, it reacts with alertness. If you talk to it with love, it responds with balance. That's how powerful the mind is. That's how sensitive your biology is. That's why one of the first steps I took was to change the way I spoke to myself, not from perfection, but from awareness. I told myself, if every cell listens, then I need to start telling it something else. And it wasn't a magical act, it was a training. Every time I felt discomfort, instead of saying this again, I would ask, what does my body want to tell me? And that question opened a completely new door. Because the body is not a traitor, it is a messenger. It's just that sometimes we have become so accustomed to the noise that we don't understand the language of the subtle. That's where my true healing began. Not when the symptoms disappeared, but when I stopped fighting with myself, when I let go of the need to control everything and embraced the possibility of learning from what I felt. Because the body is not wrong, it just repeats what you teach it. And if you teach it fear, it tenses up. But if you teach it trust, it starts to relax. And in that state, in that new silence, is where healing begins to manifest itself. One of the most powerful things I discovered on my journey was how much we cling to the past without realizing it. We think we have overcome certain things, that they are behind us, but our body has a different memory. It doesn't forget as quickly as we would like. It holds on to unexpressed emotions, swallowed words, imposed silences. And as long as we don't listen to it, it will continue to talk to us through pain, insomnia, fatigue, that tension that won't go away no matter how much we try to relax. When I began to look at my history with honesty, not from judgment, but from compassion, I realized that many wounds were still open because I had never given them space to heal. I had tried to cover them up with busyness, with demands, even with misunderstood self-help. But it's not about filling the void, but about learning to be with it without fear, to let it speak, to let it hurt if necessary, because only then can it be transformed. And then I understood something key. My brain, like my body, was not designed to suffer eternally. It was waiting for new instructions. It was waiting for me to give it permission to let go of the past, not to forget it, but to re-signify it, to take what was lived as part of the journey, not as a condemnation. And when that happens, when the body and mind no longer fight with what was, an immense energy is released, a vital force that was previously trapped, sustaining the pain. You don't need to relive every wound to heal, but you do need to recognize it, accept it as a part of you, without it defining your present, because only when you stop running from your story can you start to write a new one. Something we are rarely taught is that guilt also makes you sick. That constant weight we carry when we believe we should be different, do better, control more, give more, understand everything. That silent self-demand that settles in as a voice in your head, judging every step you take. I lived it, I carried it, and I know how exhausting it can be. But one day I understood that that guilt was not mine. It was a construction, a mold that I tried to fill to feel sufficient, accepted, loved. And that's when I began to free myself. Because when you realize that you don't have to be perfect to deserve love, everything changes. You start to live from a more honest, more real, more you-like place. You no longer react from the fear of failing, but from the will to grow. And even if you still make mistakes, you no longer punish yourself in the same way. You learn to look at yourself with different eyes, with the eyes of someone who is learning, not someone who is failing. Healing is also this, stopping carrying what doesn't belong to you, with inherited guilt, with imposed roles, with the idea that you have to do everything right all the time. You didn't come to this life to fulfill other people's expectations. You came to remember who you are, to inhabit your body, to care for your mind like a garden that deserves attention and care. And even if the path is not always easy, it can be loving, because every time you choose to let go of a limiting belief, every time you choose to rest instead of demanding more of yourself, every time you speak to yourself with tenderness instead of judging yourself, you are rewriting the story of your health. And that, even if you don't see it immediately, is a powerful medicine that no drug can replicate. One of the big lies we carry without knowing it is the belief that we are broken, that if something hurts, if something affects us or limits us, then there is something defective in us. But what if it weren't so? What if in reality we weren't broken, but full of layers that don't belong to us? Layers of other people's beliefs, of voices from the past, of thoughts repeated so many times that we no longer question them. That was what I understood when I began to listen to my mind without judging it, just observing. I realized that many of the ideas I had about myself were not mine, they were inherited. And that's when everything began to change. Because the mind is not your enemy. It is a fertile space, but what you sow in it matters. If every day you feed it fear, scarcity, guilt, or self-demand, that will be what flourishes. But if you start to sow presence, acceptance, tenderness, and trust, your reality begins to transform, not overnight, but step by step, like a muscle that strengthens with practice. And then you start to notice that what used to trigger you no longer has the same power. That you can look at fear without trembling, that you can be with yourself without the need to numb yourself, that you can breathe inside the chaos without getting lost. You don't need to fix yourself, you just need to return to yourself, to that space inside you where there is no noise, where there are no demands, where everything is okay just as it is. Because from that place, the body also begins to relax. Healing is not a linear process, but it is constant when you stop demanding immediate results. Your brain begins to create new routes when you give yourself permission to question the old. And that, although it seems small, is a radical act of self-love. There is a moment on the path where you realize that you don't need to understand everything to start healing. That there are wounds that have no logical explanation, but that still deserve care, that you won't always know where your fears or your anxiety come from. But that doesn't mean you should ignore them. The body feels even when the mind has no words. And when we learn to validate that feeling without needing to understand it completely, we take a giant step towards healing. Sometimes people ask me, but how do you start? How do you unprogram years of limiting beliefs, of repetitive thoughts, of stories that hurt? And although there is no magic formula, there is a starting point: presence, being here, listening to yourself without interrupting yourself, giving yourself that place you may have never given yourself before. Because when you truly listen to yourself, without looking for an immediate solution, what is wounded begins to soften, because you are no longer running away, you are accompanying yourself. The brain has an impressive capacity to regenerate, but it needs guidance, and that guidance begins with your daily choices. You don't need to change everything all at once. You just need to start choosing differently, even in small things. The thought you choose to repeat, the way you talk to yourself in the mirror, the permission you give yourself to feel without judging yourself. All of that builds a new network inside you, a network that is more solid, more loving, more you. And then one day, without realizing it, you find yourself reacting differently, talking to yourself with more tenderness, letting go of what used to trap you, not because everything is resolved, but because now you know that you are not alone in your process, you are with yourself. And that, believe me, is more powerful than any medicine. We live in a culture that glorifies productivity, constant doing, having everything under control, and without realizing it, we end up disconnecting from the essential: rest, pauses, inner silence. I also fell into that trap. I thought that if I stopped, I would lose, that if I wasn't doing, I wasn't worth it. But the body has its own language, and if you don't listen to it in time, it screams, sometimes in the form of anxiety, sometimes in the form of illness, sometimes with a simple exhaustion that you can no longer ignore. It was there that I understood that rest is not a luxury, it is a medicine, that honoring my rhythms, my pauses, my emotional needs was not weakness but wisdom, and that in that space of stillness, the brain also reorganizes itself, because the brain, just like a house, needs order. It cannot function well if it is saturated, if everything is urgent, if there is no space to breathe. And I'm not just referring to physical rest, but to that mental rest that we avoid so much. The one where you don't have to solve anything or be anyone else but yourself. When I started to prioritize myself, to say no without guilt, to stop being available for everyone else but not for me, something moved deeply. I started to heal from within, because the body feels it when you choose yourself, because the mind responds when you treat it with kindness. It's not selfishness, it's emotional survival. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't heal in an environment that demands you destroy yourself to fit in. So yes, sometimes the bravest act is to stop, to choose yourself, to give yourself permission to do without doing. And there, right there, the true transformation begins. Perhaps what moved me the most about this process was realizing that I was never broken, I was just disconnected. I had learned to live from fear, from haste, from the need for approval, and that distanced me from myself so much that I came to think that healing was impossible. But it wasn't. It's just that I was looking for it where it wasn't. In external solutions, in other people's validations, in formulas that didn't speak my inner language. It was then that I understood that healing was not about reaching a perfect place, but about returning home to that part of me that was always intact, waiting for me to look at it. And that return is not achieved with demands, but with love, with pauses, with honesty, with a lot of patience. It's about re-inhabiting yourself with tenderness, with humility, without expecting applause or immediate results. What I want to tell you today is that you don't need to wait until you are ready to start. You can start broken, confused, tired, because the process doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. And every step, no matter how small it seems, adds up. Every time you choose not to speak to yourself badly, every time you breathe before reacting, every time you decide not to follow the old pattern, all of that is part of your medicine. And yes, healing hurts sometimes because it involves letting go of the known, even if it hurts, but it also relieves, frees you, returns you to yourself. And when that happens, you no longer need others to understand you because you finally do, and that is enough. If this healing journey taught me anything, it's that the body was never my enemy. It was my ally, my messenger, the one who spoke to me when I didn't want to listen, the one who sustained me even when I heard it, and the one who showed me with its symptoms, with its tiredness, with its illness, that there was something urgent to attend to. I listened to it late, but I listened, and then I treated it differently, no longer with complaints or reproaches, but with gratitude, because I understood that every pain was a cry for help, every discomfort a signal. And by starting to treat it with respect, everything changed. Food became an act of love, rest a priority, movement a gift, and the mind finally a safer space. My body didn't need me to control it. It needed me to love it, to trust in its intelligence, to stop sabotaging it with thoughts of rejection. And that was the greatest medicine of all, self-love as the foundation of all healing. Today I can say that my brain not only changed my way of thinking, it changed my way of living. Because when you change on the inside, everything on the outside also adjusts, not the other way around. And if you made it this far, it's because there's something inside you that already knows it, that is waking up, that wants to heal for real, not to please, not to comply, but to live in peace. In the end, it's not just about healing the body, but about learning to heal the way you think about yourself, about life, and about what you deserve. Because when you regain control of your mind, there is no diagnosis that can steal your hope. You don't need to wait for an external miracle when you can become the miracle yourself. If this video resonated with you, write below, "I am my own medicine." Your story does not end with a symptom, it begins with a decision. If this message did you good, like, subscribe,